Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 4, Scene 1 of Macbeth by Shakespeare. So you need to be familiar with this scene already. You may have read it, listened to it, watched it, or studied it in class before, and you're using this video as a revision tool, or maybe to gain some deeper knowledge if you didn't understand it the first time around. So I'll start by summarising what happens in Act 4 Scene 1, we'll then look at the key characters, themes, contexts, I'll then select a few of my favourite quotes and the matching techniques you may want to memorise for your exam, and I'll leave you with an exam style question you can complete at the end. So what happens in Act 4 Scene 1 of Macbeth? The answer is quite a lot happens. So it starts off with the three witches meeting and they are concocting a potion. That means they're mixing a potion in a cauldron. A cauldron is a big pot. And they're putting all kinds of disgusting ingredients in there. Eyes of newt, toe of frog, wool of bat, tongue of dog. And this is sort of designed by Shakespeare to disgust and fascinate his Jacobean audience in equal measure. Hecate, who is then the queen of the witches, appears. She encourages the Weird Sisters. She sort of gives them a thumbs up and a pat on the back and says, "Well done, keep going with the manipulation of Macbeth." And then Hecate disappears from the scene. Almost immediately after, Macbeth arrives, and actually the second witch says, "Something wicked this way comes," and wicked is in reference to Macbeth. So Macbeth arrives and he demands of the three witches to answer his questions. And the witches say, "Do you want the answers from us, or do you want to hear it from our masters?" So Macbeth says he wants to hear it from the masters. And what happens is the three witches summon their masters, who are able to read Macbeth's mind, so they can work out what his questions are before he even asks them. And these masters provide their answers in the form of apparitions. An apparition is a spectral, is a ghostly vision. So it's something you can see. It's not real, it's not tangible, you can't touch it, but you can see this sort of magical, supernatural image. So the first apparition the masters concoct is an armed head. Armed head is the stage direction used. And here it doesn't mean arms are growing out of your head. Armed, it means armoured. So a head that is wearing armour, that would be a helmet. And this armed head, so this head with a helmet, says to Macbeth, "Beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife." So the first apparition gives Macbeth a warning, and Macbeth is grateful for this warning. The first apparition disappears, and the second apparition appears. Now the second apparition is a bloody child, and that again is the stage direction. That's what Shakespeare wants the apparition to be, a bloody child. And the bloody child says to Macbeth that none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Now this is a great prophecy to receive, because most human beings are born from a woman. So if no human born of a woman can harm Macbeth, that basically makes Macbeth immortal. He cannot receive any harm from a human. So Macbeth is very grateful for this prophecy. He does think to himself it's a bit weird that the first prophecy is beware Macduff, and now the second prophecy is that no human can harm him. He thinks it sort of contradicts the first prophecy a bit, but he's actually so happy with this prophecy, it really doesn't bother him. So the second apparition disappears, and the third apparition appears. Now the third apparition is a child crowned with a tree in his hand. Again, that is the stage directions. That is what Shakespeare wants a third apparition to look like on stage. So it's a child wearing a crown, holding a tree, I think realistically a branch, in his hands. And the third apparition says to Macbeth, "Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." And that basically translates as Macbeth cannot be vanquished or defeated, or any of his plans cannot fail, until Great Birnam Wood, which is a very large forest, uproots itself and moves itself up to the top of high Dunsinane Hill. Now it seems biologically and environmentally impossible for an entire forest to uproot itself and move up a hill. So again, Macbeth is delighted by this third prophecy that basically suggests that none of his plans can fail and he can never be defeated unless something completely unnatural, such as a forest moving up a hill, happens. Now, there's a few things I want to clear up at this stage of the lesson, of the video. I use prophecy and prediction interchangeably. So if I say that these are the three prophecies, I may later on say these are three predictions. I use them to mean the same thing. Now, these three prophecies are separate to the three prophecies Macbeth receives in Act 1. In what I would call the Act 1 prophecies, Macbeth receives three prophecies. That will be Thane of Glamis, thou will be Thane of Cawdor, and thou shalt be king hereafter. Those are the first three prophecies or predictions that Macbeth receives. Now, he is already Thane of Glamis. Very soon after receiving the prophecy, he becomes Thane of Cawdor, and that inspires him to make the third prophecy come true of being king hereafter and killing King Duncan. Those are the first three predictions or prophecies that the witches give Macbeth. I call these prophecies and predictions, I call them the Act 4 prophecies or predictions. And they are the three predictions that I've given you here. Now, these predictions are purposefully deceitful. They are designed to trick Macbeth. Macbeth trusts the witches at this stage, so he trusts the prophecies. However, the witches' prophecies are not 100% true. There are caveats, there are situations which actually these prophecies become false and they lead to Macbeth's downfall, his tragic ending. Let me explain it in a bit more detail. The first apparition is the armed head. That foreshadows, that predicts the decapitation, the chopping off of Macbeth's head at the end of Act 5. So when Macbeth sees the armoured head, he believes it's maybe a soldier or someone from a military position giving him a warning to beware Macduff, and he's very grateful for the warning. What he doesn't realise is that the head with the helmet is his head, and it's been chopped off, it's been decapitated. That's why you only see the head and not the rest of the person. And this is a foreshadowing of Macbeth's own tragic end at the end of this play. The second apparition is a bloody child. Now, the prophecy the bloody child says is none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. And when babies are born, they tend to come out in a bloody state. That's part of the childbirthing process. However, if you have read ahead in Macbeth, and sorry, spoilers alert if you haven't, Macduff was not naturally born. He was not naturally conceived. Instead, he was born via a caesarean section. It says he was untimely ripped from his mother's womb. And again, the ripping of a baby or the caesarean section procedure would have produced a lot of blood. It would have produced a bloody child. So actually, the second apparition symbolises Macduff, who was not born of a woman in the conventional natural sense, but was ripped through a C-section, a caesarean section, and actually the witches are showing Macduff as the bloody child. But Macbeth completely doesn't see this, he doesn't read this, and he trusts the witches, but ultimately it leads to his downfall with Macduff killing him at the end of the play. And the third apparition is a child that's crowned with a tree in his hand. Now this is significant because this represents Malcolm, and Malcolm is the rightful heir to the Scottish throne because he's King Duncan's eldest son, and we know from the divine right of kings that God picks, the royal family. And what Malcolm has done, and we know this from the previous scene we read, is that he's gone down to England with Macduff to raise the English army with the help of the King of England to come and conquer Macbeth's castle and kill Macbeth. Now again, spoiler alert, shooting ahead in the play, how the English army with Malcolm and Macduff approached the castle is they disguised themselves by cutting down the boughs, the branches and the twigs and the leaves from trees, and then as an army they marched towards Macbeth's castle. This is how Birnam Wood, an entire army or an entire forest appears to move up High Dunsinane Hill towards Macbeth's castle. So what the witches are doing is they're actually showing Macbeth Malcolm, who's the rightful heir to the throne, and they're revealing Malcolm's great tactic, which is to disguise the English army with trees in their hands to camouflage themselves, and that's how they climb up to Macbeth's castle on Dunsinane Hill and kill him. However, Macbeth completely misreads this prophecy, this apparition. He just doesn't see that, and instead he thinks that none of his plans will fail. And as a result, Macbeth is incredibly arrogant. I've taught you some Greek words such as hamartia and hubris. This would be a good time to bring in that word hubris. He has excessive pride. The second apparition, the second prophecy from Act 4, says that none born of woman shall harm Macbeth. That basically means Macbeth is immortal. No human can hurt Macbeth. And that third apparition that says Macbeth shall never vanquished be until Great Burnham Wood moves to High Dunsinane Hill shall come against him, that basically means Macbeth cannot fail in any of his endeavours until a forest moves to up a hill, which for most people would say that's biologically and environmentally impossible. So the result of these two prophecies in particular give Macbeth excessive pride, hubris, and it's this excessive pride and his trust in the supernatural evil witches that is a large contributing factor to his downfall in Act 5 of the play Macbeth. So believe it or not, the scene doesn't end there. Sorry for the detailed analysis, but I hope you found it useful. Macbeth then asks the witch for one more question to be answered. He says, will Banquo's issue, that means Banquo's children, Banquo's descendants, will they inherit the throne? And the three witches are initially reluctant. They said, no, we're not going to tell you. But then Macbeth presses them even further. He actually says, I'll curse you if you don't tell me. So the three witches conjure up another sort of vision for Macbeth, and the three witches reveal a show of 8 kings, and the last king with a glass in his hand, and Banquo's ghost following. And I've taken that directly from the stage directions. So what they show is they show 8 kings appearing in the cauldron, and the last king has a glass, a looking glass, what we might call a handheld mirror. And because of this mirror, it sort of reflects the 8 kings, so the 8 kings become 16 kings, and then it reflects again in the mirror, and it reflects again and again. So it shows like through an optical illusion, an endless line of kings. And at the end of the line is Banquo's ghost. So this suggests that Banquo has started this long line of descendants. So actually, yes, Banquo's issue, Banquo's children, his heirs, his descendants, will be kings of Scotland for a long time afterwards. Macbeth is devastated by this news because all of his murdering, the murdering of King Duncan, the murdering of Banquo, all that he suffered to become king of Scotland is going to be wasted if he can't keep the power and the throne in his family. So the Weird Sisters have done their deed. They've sown the seeds of doubt and treachery they wanted to do, so they sing a quick little song and they disappear, and Macbeth is left alone. Lennox arrives on the scene and informs Macbeth that Macduff is fled to England. That's a quote from the play. Now, if you remember in the previous scene, Lennox is starting to suspect that Macbeth is actually to blame, that Macbeth has murdered King Duncan and Banquo, and that Macbeth needs to be dethroned by Macduff and Malcolm and the English army. However, Lennox is still loyal to his king, which is what would have been expected of a man in 11th century Albus, Scotland, and he still does his duty to inform Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England. This turns out to be a very costly mistake for Macduff's family, because Macbeth reveals in an aside, which is like a short soliloquy, so none of the other characters on stage can hear the aside, only the audience. Macbeth reveals in this aside that he plans to slaughter Macduff's family, his wife and his children. Now this really paints Macbeth as evil. When he wanted to kill King Duncan, he ummed and ahed about it, and he hesitated and he backed out, and his wife sort of manipulated him into doing it. When it came to killing Banquo, his friend, he sort of ummed and ahed about it, and then he hired assassins to do it. Now, when the opportunity presents itself, Macduff is off to England, so therefore his castle is vulnerable. Macbeth doesn't even hesitate, doesn't and ah or think about it. He's purely evil. He's ready to hire assassins to kill, but not kill a man, to kill a defenceless woman and innocent children. Macbeth has descended into pure evil. So, who are our key characters in this scene? Of course, we have the three witches. They are sort of disgusting and fascinating in equal measure. They're on stage looking quite disgusting, mixing a potion that sounds really disgusting. They're clearly supernatural. And we know that because they talk in rhyme, double, double, toil and trouble. And the meter with which they speak is unnatural. It's not a normal meter. So this signifies that they're supernatural characters. They're clearly evil, so they plan and to purposely manipulate Macbeth towards his downfall and his eventual death. And we begin to learn as the play progresses that the three witches really just mess with Macbeth for entertainment. There's no reason why they chose Macbeth. There's no particular reason why they want him to die, or why they want to trick him or make him suffer, or make his wife suffer. But they just do it because they can, and because maybe it entertains them. So the witches are truly evil characters. Hecate appears in this scene. She's the queen of the witches. Apparently, according to Shakespearean scholars, Hecate was added to the text. Shakespeare didn't originally have this character in the text. She was added later on by someone else. However, she appears in most of the texts that students study, so I include her in these video explanations. Of course, Macbeth arrives. What I find really interesting is he's referred to with the adjective wicked. Something wicked this way comes. Whereas in the past, there were positive adjectives used about him, such as brave and worthy and valiant. He's lost all of that credential. He is now just a wicked creature. We know Macbeth is ambitious for power. He was willing to kill King Duncan for it. He was willing to kill his best friend Banquo for it. And now he's even willing to kill innocent women and children in Macduff's wife and Macduff's children. However, he cannot keep the power in his family, and that makes him incredibly upset. So he's done all of this killing in order to become King of Scotland, in the hope that his children and his descendants will also be kings of Scotland. However, the witches' prophecies, particularly that final image they showed him of the 8 kings with the mirror and Banquo's ghost, suggests that all of Macbeth's murdering and descent into madness and suffering has been in vain, because Banquo's Banquo's children, will inherit the throne, not Macbeth's children. And Macbeth has decided to trust the supernatural, which is a big mistake. He really shouldn't have done that, and it's one of the big contributing factors to his downfall. Macbeth is beginning to go mad at this stage, and we already know he's shown signs of madness before with seeing Banquo's ghost. But when Lennox arrives on the scene, he asks Lennox, "Did you see the 3 witches? Did you see the weird sisters?" He's clearly quite agitated. He doesn't know if he can trust his senses or not. Were they really here, or did it come from his heat-oppressed mind again? He's really psychologically in quite an unstable condition. And finally, we do learn he's truly evil, particularly with that aside at the end where he plans to kill a defenceless woman and innocent children. He plans to give the edge of his sword to them, which means he's going to kill them. Lennox arrives on the scene, and he's sort of conflicted because he suspects Macbeth is evil. However, he still has to perform his duties to the king as an honourable thane. So he performs his duty, but he does suspect Macbeth is an evil character. But unfortunately, in performing his duty, he condemns Macduff's wife and children to their deaths. So, what key themes can we explore in this scene? Well, of course we have the supernatural. It becomes clearer that the witches and Hecate simply meddle in Macbeth's life for their own entertainment, for their own joy. We know they're supernatural because of the things that they're putting in their potion, in the cauldron, the way they speak with the rhyming couplets and the unique meter that sets them apart from natural characters. There's a theme of trust here, and Macbeth misplaces his trust in the supernatural. and this is a huge mistake of his. We know that the supernatural are evil in this play, so trusting in something evil is going to lead to your downfall. We have a theme of appearance versus reality, and this is particularly true for those apparitions, those 3 prophecies or predictions from Act 4. Macbeth interprets them all positively. They appear positive. But in reality, the witches have built in some deception, some trickery. That means instead of having a positive effect for Macbeth, it will have a negative effect and lead to his tragic ending. And we have the theme of loyalty here. This mainly concerns Lennox. He's got conflicting loyalties. He suspects Macbeth is evil and wants to dethrone him, but also he needs to fulfill his duty as a loyal thane to the Scottish throne. So contextually speaking, there's nothing new here. I'm just bringing up context I've already taught you that you could use for this scene. King James I, who was on the throne in the Jacobean era, he wrote a book called Demonology, all about witches. So I always imagine him in the audience watching this scene going, or thinking to himself, I never would have trusted those witches. I know all about these witches. I know how evil they are. So Shakespeare writes his plays to really please his patrons, and King James was his patron. He would have funded the performances. So Shakespeare includes elements that would please the king, and evil witches would have been one of those elements that would have pleased King James I. King James I also believed he descended from Banquo, so Shakespeare has a nice little compliment to King James I, because Banquo's descendants become the kings of Scotland, and King James I believes he's descended from Banquo, and we know that because of the divine right of kings, God puts the king on the throne. So if King James I descends from Banquo, and Banquo is the line, the royal heritage that God chose to be on the throne, basically Shakespeare is saying to his audience that King James I is the true king, the God-chosen king of England, and therefore to not attempt any regicide on him. It's a warning to the audience. This is God's king, do not attack him. Because remember, at the time, the gunpowder plot was going on, and there was real paranoia about assassination attempts on the king. We also know that Macbeth and Banquo were real historical figures. Shakespeare was very well read on his history, but his plays aren't necessarily historically accurate. He chops and changes things for entertainment purposes. And we have this idea of kingship. Kingship is the qualities that make a good king, and Macbeth really doesn't have any of them in this scene. He has poor kingship. He trusts witches, which is an example of poor judgment, and he slaughters women and children for his own ends, which I think everyone can agree with is just a hideous, evil thing to do. No one should do that, let alone a king who has been put in charge of an entire country of women and children. So what quotes would I personally look at to memorise in this scene? Well, you have "something wicked this way comes." This is the second witch who says this, and I would zoom in on the adjective wicked. Previously in Act 1, Scene 2, particularly when the soldier was recounting Macbeth in battle, he used really positive adjectives to describe Macbeth. Valiant, worthy, brave. Now the adjectives that describe Macbeth are pretty negative, such as wicked. This shows how Macbeth, through trusting his wife, through trusting the witches, through making a series of bad decisions, has gone from a good character to an evil character. The witches speak in rhyming couplets: double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn and cauldron, bubble. Trouble and bubble rhyme, and they come in successive lines, so we call it a rhyming couplet, and this clearly sets them apart as supernatural. The first apparition says, "Beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife." That's a really good quote to memorise because it is the second set of prophecies. If I was zooming in on a technique for this quote, I would look at the repetition of beware. The witches are trying to come across like they're helping Macbeth. Look, beware of Macduff, beware of the Thane of Fife. They repeat beware. But that sort of puts Macbeth in a false sense of security, particularly with the second two prophecies, which ultimately lead to his downfall. The second of these prophecies, the second apparition, says and the second apparition says, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth." Now this really links with the theme of appearance versus reality. None of woman born shall harm Macbeth. It appears that no human can harm Macbeth, because every human, both man and woman, would have been born from their mother. They would have been woman born. However, the reality is there is some deception, there is some trickery here, and that caesarean section births don't count, and therefore Macbeth isn't as immortal as he thought, and he is open to a mortal wound, to being killed. The third prediction from Act 3 is that Macbeth shall never be vanquished till great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Now this is said by the third apparition, and again this clearly links to that theme of appearance versus reality. It appears biologically and environmentally impossible for a forest to move up a hill, but the reality is, if soldiers cut off bits of that wood, such as branches and leaves and twigs, and then walk up the hill, it gives the illusion of a forest moving up the hill. And that is Macbeth's undoing. He thinks that none of his plans can fail, he thinks he cannot be defeated or conquered, but in reality there is a caveat, there is a workaround that the witches have built into their prophecy, which means he's lulled into a false sense of security, and ultimately he will experience his downfall in Act 5 of Macbeth. When Lennox arrives, he does his duty, even though he suspects Macbeth is an evil king. He does he's loyal to the Scottish crown, and he tells Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England. Unfortunately, this is a big mistake, because Macbeth seizes the opportunity to kill Macduff's wife and kids, and we learn this in an aside. Now, an aside is a short soliloquy. A soliloquy is a monologue where the character reveals their thoughts and feelings to the audience. An aside is a short version of that. And in Macbeth's aside, he says that he'll give the edge of the sword his wife and babes. So he's going to give the sharp end of the sword to Macduff's wife and Macduff's babies, children. He's going to have them assassinated. He doesn't even do it himself, he hires assassins to do it. That's truly evil, and that is truly cowardly. So, there was a lot of information I packed in there, particularly about the prophecies and predictions, and the idea of them being deceitful, tricking Macbeth, this idea of appearance versus reality. I suggest you make lots of notes from this video on a physical copy of the play. You may then go on to answer the question, what effects do the three witches' prophecies from Act 4 have on Macbeth? Now, I call them the prophecies from Act 4 to distinguish them from the three prophecies from Act 1. What effects do they have on Macbeth? The first one appears to be a warning, beware Macduff. The second one lulls Macbeth into thinking he's immortal. The third one lulls Macbeth into thinking that he cannot be defeated or conquered. However, there are caveats, there are workarounds, there is deception in there, which ultimately leads to Macbeth's downfall, because he's too hubristic, he has too much pride, he hasn't seen the problems, he's placed too much trust in the witches. But ultimately certain things happen. Macduff is born from a caesarean section. Malcolm instructs his army to break off branches and leaves from the forest and before marching up Dunsinane Hill to Macbeth's castle. And all of these prophecies turn out to not be true. Unlike the first three prophecies, which all come true, the second lot of three prophecies in Act 4 are all... the last two are broken. That first prophecy, beware Macduff, is actually true, because Macbeth should have paid attention to it. Okay, if you found this video useful for your understanding of this scene, please give it a like. Please also consider subscribing to my channel to get the rest of my Macbeth explanation videos, and feel free to leave a comment if you think there's anything I missed out from this scene. So thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.